To those who are less familiar with motorbikes as a whole, you might wonder why a bike like this is so high in my top 50 list, given that I produce far more car content than I do bikes. Well, for one thing, Bimota is my favourite motorbike brand. The Ducati 748 I love, the Mission RS I love, the Agility Saetta I love, but as a brand overall, Bimota for me is like Maserati for me with cars. Maserati is my favourite car brand, or Panos, for instance, in the racing world. Panos is my favourite team, Maserati is my favourite car company, and Bimota is my favourite motorcycle brand. Now, one of the most significant things for me about Bimota is that they literally inspired, directly, the colours of this channel. My red, white and black is a direct homage to my love for Bimota. So they are the inspiration for HSG. Now this one is my favourite Bimota ever. It's not the fastest Bimota ever, although it's up there for sure, and it is one of the rarest. Now to say it's one of the rarest Bimotas isn't saying much, because they're all extremely rare. They built barely over 100 of these. And for those who are unfamiliar with the brand, it's an Italian company who make some of the most expensive and most exclusive bikes you can buy, even to this day, although I'm not as much of a fan of their latest machines. I like them a lot, but I think the most recent one that they made that I genuinely love was the DB5, which is a very small, cute little semi-city bike or semi-naked bike, but it does have a full fairing. This one, though, is pure, full-on superbike, and in fact, it's one of the fastest superbikes of the late 80s and early 90s. It's around 170 miles per hour in terms of top-end potential. Now, what Bimota does, and they do it very well, and a couple of other companies do it also, is combining the style of something like Italy, for instance, certainly in this case, with the engineering prowess of Japan. That's exactly what this bike does. So again, in a similar way to some of the other vehicles that I've mentioned before, my favourites and otherwise, it's kind of like Pagani. They have this gorgeous Italian style and combine it with great German engineering. Or for instance, the McLaren F1. It combines British aero engineering and technical side of things with German power. Great pairings produce great vehicles. And that's exactly what Bimota like to do. And they make fantastic bikes. Now this one is my absolute favourite for a number of reasons, but the main one, as is often the case for me, is that initial visual attraction. I think this is possibly the most beautiful bike ever made, and I know that's a very, very strong statement to make, and one which not many people at all would agree with. I may even be the only person to think that, who knows. But it's definitely the most beautiful Bimota, as far as I'm concerned, and they've made some incredible looking bikes. But this one to me takes the cake. It has everything that I love about the 80s, because I think the 80s has some fantastic style, and it's definitely got that transitional look to it, where it's most definitely a late 80s, early 90s bike. It doesn't look quite as new and as fresh as the Ducati, but it's definitely moving out of the 80s. It's got the strong colour clashing, really, of the 80s, which again lends itself to the livery of the brand, but the performance is also fantastic. As I already said, it's one of the quickest superbikes, certainly one of the quickest Italian superbikes. I mean, this thing came out 5 years before the Ducati, and it's about 20 miles per hour faster. Now, of course, it's not a 748, it's a much more powerful bike. This is actually powered by over a 1000cc Yamaha engine, putting out 145 horsepower to the Ducati's 100. It's a completely different category of bike. As I already said, 170 miles per hour, and even the used prices, as you would assume, do definitely mirror the kind of exclusivity which this bike has. The Ducati 748 you can pick up for about 3 to 4, sometimes 5 grand, so it's a very reasonable bike. One of the most affordable on my entire list, actually. It might even be the most attainable. This one, on the other hand, it's a little bit more. It's about 8 to 12 grand, depending on when you pick one up, which again for a motorbike doesn't sound that much compared to many of the supercars on this list, but for a bike, especially one from the late 80s, early 90s, that's a pretty huge price. It's a pretty good investment as well. Now, the bike itself is one which I would most definitely put in my dream category. This is the kind of bike which I would almost like as a transitional bike. I would probably buy the Ducati 748 earlier, to get used to increased performance, to enjoy my time on that bike, and then this one would be the next level for me. More power, even better looks, kind of. I love them both so much that it flip-flops back and forth for me. But even though I would put the Ducati higher if I could rejiggle the list, this one definitely deserves to be very high. 12th place is perfect for this bike. I love Bimota so much as a brand. I love the livery to the point of literally inspiring me in my creative process on the channel. I mean, it speaks for itself. To me, Bimota is my Maserati of bike brands, although I guess you could say they're kind of the Maserati of bikes. They almost feel, again, kind of like the Pagani of bikes, though. But since MV Agusta is more so the Pagani of bikes, yeah, I think Bimota may well be the Maserati of the bike world. They're not as popular or as highly selling as, for instance, Ducati or even MV Agusta, but they are the slightly more oddball, less obvious choice, just like Maserati. Overall then, it's a bike which I absolutely adore, and as I said, strong enough to the point of saying I think it's the best looking bike I've ever seen. And I've seen quite a few bikes, so I absolutely love the YB6 EXUP, and that's it for this pick. So of course, if you want to check out other bikes and a whole lot more cars in this list, you can click through at the end to see all of them. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.